Well, good morning. Just been playing around with the mic. Hopefully, it sounds all right. That being said, just wanted to share some insights that I've come across from a couple of different sources. So, I'm actually not that worried about taking ideas from different areas. I've talked about this before, that I started to get a little weirded out because some of these ideas that I thought were my own original, unique ideas, and as I found out that nothing that's not special. There's nothing new about that. But thanks to these three books in a set by Austin Kleon, I was able to realize that's what art is, right? You emulate your idols, and in the failing to clone them, right, duplicate them, be them, in the failing to achieve, you know, this icon that you were trying to emulate, what you end up finding out is who you really are, right? So that being said, nothing new under the sun, and I stole that from Austin Kleon, but I've been using it for years. I got it from Northrop Frye. Oh, by the way, Austin Kleon, he's also got a background in philosophy, so I wasn't surprised. But because I'm Canadian, I had a much stronger emphasis in my education placed on Northrop Frye, great Canadian who wrote about the Bible and its influence on literature. And that was a big part of it, right? Nothing new under the sun. I've mentioned this before, that everything, all great literature, culture, ideas, art, is like a flowing stream. And whatever came before gets laid down like silt on the bed of the river, the stream. And over time, more content builds up, covers over the old content. But because we can't see it, doesn't mean it's not there, not present. The example I give is Jung, who regularly quotes Nietzsche and a few other great scholars, which for me backs up my theory that most of Jung's ideas came from Nietzsche. Maybe not just Nietzsche. There's some ideas that could have come from Proust. And Nietzsche was influenced by Plotinus and, then his buddies who translated so many Indian philosophies, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita. I have no doubt he also knew or was familiar with quite a bit of Buddhist thought. Therefore, Stoicism, Pyrrhonism, you name it, right? A lot of these philosophies are just a rewording of the previous. Sorry, I apologize. Rambling on. But what I'm talking about here is Jung quoted the Bible when he said, we have faith, hope, love, and charity. He added that. Because in Corinthians, it is, my faith is faith, hope, and love. But above all, love. That's the Bible quote. And I love that he added in charity, which shows an influence via Nietzsche and or Buddhism and Vedanta, this idea that dana, charity, to oneself and others is absolutely important. To me, the real key is community, right? And he does talk about that. But I might have even considered adding that to his little line. But like I said, nothing new under the sun. But just to show you how things don't really change that much. So about 100 years ago, in this collection of speeches that Jung gave, he talked about some of these things that I've mentioned, right? Many times, obviously. But one thing that he just mentioned in his Psychotherapists or the Clergy, which is the last speech that he gave in this collection of speeches that have been collected under the title Modern Man in Search of Its Soul. He's talking about what this modern man is. Spoiler, modern man is someone who realizes that man is just something to go through, a path through, as Nietzsche said. The Übermensch is the target we're meant to shoot for, like that moonshot goal that I mentioned from the I Ching. So when you're trying to cross a river, you set your target higher up on the bank than where you want to land because the current is going to carry you down. That's what the Übermensch is. So the modern man is someone, as Jung said, standing at the edge of a void. at an abyss, which he very clearly explains is this potentiality. That, as Nietzsche explained, if we can stop being pressured by dead people, traditions, if we can start to find the meaning that quickens, so we start doing rituals and ceremonies for the value they're meant to provide. I've mentioned this before, that we've seen some of the most irreligious countries, according to stats, have the most meaning in just about everything they do. And what we're finding is they're doing much better than the countries who claim to be much more religious, yet don't apply the same meaning. And what I mean by that is, in Japan, they'll say that they don't have a religion. In fact, they consider religion a bit toxic because they've had some bad experiences in the past. Yet, they place meaning in almost everything, right? They'll be born, Shinto ceremonies, their first year of life, they'll do another ceremony, and Buddhist special festivals. I mean, arguably we make fun of North America with all our special holidays, but have you looked to see how many holidays and rites and national observances that Japan has, right? And compare that to North America, which I was shocked to read first that they say the number of irreligious people in North America is it's higher in Canada, lower in America, but it still hovers around 20 to 25%-ish. But those numbers include Buddhists and the indigenous. So right away, there's something really disgusting right away. That's not irreligious. I mean, religion, the definition, again, you'd think these people would understand simple language, is the path that you follow with devotion and commitment. Sure, there is a definition of religion, meaning you believe in God, but that's not the majority of these definitions. And when we break these down, so what are we going to do? Are we going to throw in, a Shaivist, Vedantin? Because they didn't. Are we going to throw them in with the irreligious? Because they're fine with you not believing in a supreme being, right? They're just like Spinoza and Emerson and Whitman. If you want to believe that God is the power that makes flowers grow, so be it. But are we going to lump them in with the irreligious? Certainly not. So really, in North America, the number of irreligious people is really only about 11%, believe it or not, or less, actually, because I think amongst those is probably only a couple percent who are truly these apathetic atheists, these toxic atheists that Jung warned us about, these pseudo-moderns, or worse. Nietzsche warned us about these herd beasts. Jung also quotes Nietzsche multiple times talking about them being the herd. So what am I getting at here? I'm talking about community and truth and how long it takes for some of these truths to trickle down into broader society, and why sometimes they may never trickle down to society. So I'll give you first the example that just recently is beginning to trickle down. So what was I talking about? So in Jung's books, he talks about, just in passing, but he mentions it, that it takes on average about 20 years for a new idea, a new treatment, a new protocol. I mean, the example might be the talking cure. It was originally developed, psychology. It was originally developed by a doctor by the name of Buer? Don't quote me on this, but this one doctor had a patient who actually trained him and explained that talking about her psychosis, whatever you'd want to call it, her problem, she was quite extremely ill, helped her. And so he considered this the talking cure. That doctor, you call him maybe a proto-psychologist, that doctor actually had a student. His name was Freud, Sigmund. And that doctor had a student as well by the name of Salome. But that's a whole other story that I've told in another podcast. So this talking cure, which was actually taught to the doctor by the patient, yet we've forgotten how important this is, and I'll get to what I mean by that, took 20 years before it became commonplace, because this was developed before Carl Jung was even a doctor. So it took many years. In fact, I've mentioned William James. And I wonder whether Carl Jung was ever lucky enough to read some of William James's philosophy, some of his science. He was a psychologist and a philosopher. He originally came up with this idea of pragmatism, which he's much more known for. But he himself realized that pragmatism left something wanting. Right? So he came up, wasn't published until after his death, something called radical empiricism. And just again, nothing new under the sun. Radical empiricism is exactly what Nietzsche was calling for in Zarathustra. It's exactly what Carl Jung calls for, a meaning that quickens. It's called the happy fiction, or gaslighting yourself, like Albert Camus. Only Camus had more balls, right? Because Albert Camus admitted life is crazy. Life is absurd. Embrace it. Whereas Jung realizes most people can't just accept the fact that, life is not going to be exactly the way they want it to be. Like Carl Friston's free energy, right? Everything becomes a surprise because you're always expecting something different, or you want something different, instead of accepting whatever may come. That's Nietzsche's eternal return, the eternal recurrence, right? So Jung mentioned that it takes 20 years for these ideas to trickle, matriculate, trickle down into society. And he was talking about, like I said, psychology. Right? It's 20 years after the talking cure was developed, then it started to become well used, and then it was used incredibly heavily. I find it weird that Freud's philosophy was so much more common than Jung's, and I think it's because of this one problem. Because Freud took a very long time to admit that he had to consider the question of religion. Because religion is a synonym for meaning. Because religion is trust, and meaning is trust. And Freud didn't want to admit this. He truly felt, as a pragmatic doctor, that he knew everything, obviously. You know how doctors can be. But he forgot, and this is where we're in today, he forgot that there is something more. That every doctor is reminded on a regular basis. It's called placebo. In the human creature, you can heal with a sugar pill. Even if you know it's a sugar pill, if you are confident that it will heal. That's actually homeopathy. Homeopathy is purely placebo. It's considered a pseudoscience, but arguably it's gaslighting for your health. But if it works, I'm not saying homeopathy is good. It's absolutely terrible. Not my point. But what I'm getting at here is the hubris of a doctor to pretend like matter doesn't matter, right? Something more than us doesn't matter, yet uses placebo in their treatment every day, right? Because the example I usually use is antidepressants or any of these mood-altering drugs. A study just came out of SSRIs, and it showed that a big chunk of the healing from SSRIs might be chalked up to placebo. Right? And even before this study, doctors kind of already knew this, because it took approximately 2 weeks for a mood drug to take effect. Approximately. It depends on the person. That's why some people it's quicker, some people it's a little longer. But doctors would regularly say 6 weeks or more. Why? Because say if you were the type of person who it takes 2.5 weeks to work, then at 2 weeks, you start to wonder, am I broken? Is it not working for me? You want to have confidence so long that it becomes a habit, becomes an affect, that you aren't wondering, right? But are confident. Same as religion. Religion, better translated as the Sanskrit, right? I've mentioned this so many times, and this is why. Shraddha is Sanskrit for faith, but what it really is confidence, devotion, and commitment to the path that you follow. So that's what these doctors should have realized, is without proof, your average person cannot delude themselves into believing something that every stitch of evidence tells them not to believe, right? So the example would be somebody who's having, a depressive episode, or there's, whatever. I'll try to keep it simple here. So if you have depression, right, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Actually, now that I think of it, a better example would be chronic illness, because as doctors, on average, it can be 10 years before you're diagnosed with a chronic illness. And during that time, they're trying to heal you with this, with that, with this, and with that. And whether the doctor does it overtly or not, they almost always invariably make the patient feel like it's psychosomatic, or, it's something they're doing wrong. But it's just normal human behavior, right? Because they're frustrated and they only know so much. But fast forward during those years of trying to get diagnosed, and the sad truth is your average patient starts to develop PTSD, starts to develop confidence issues, anxiety, depression, worse maybe even, right? All because of not the disease anymore, but because of the treatments or the lack thereof. It's really quite tragic how we end up leaving a lot of people. And this, I know it seems like it's not related at all, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. When it takes 20 years for this information to make it to the mainstream, this is Carl Jung talking about medicine. And he was talking about 20 years to go from science and scholars down to the lay people. But I argue, fast forward 100 years, and I don't know what Jung would say about this, but doctors are guilty of this as well. Because I've given this as an example. I've been trying to deal with inflammation for years. And quite a number of years ago, when my doctor said, "That's it, we got nothing for you," he tried all the different drugs because he was trying to treat my anxiety as a biological or a chemical issue. He didn't realize that trauma, he should, right? Because this is not a regular doctor. My doctor actually is also a psychologist, and I might even be a psychiatrist. I can't remember exactly, but he did the rotations in the psychiatric hospital and all that jazz. He should be very well educated on this subject. But in the end, it was an auto-inflammatory based condition which causes all the same symptoms of mood. But never mind taking 8 more years to be diagnosed, every doctor should know that can cause anxiety and depression. So trying to mask the symptoms of anxiety and depression without trying to find the root, source, or cause of pre-existing conditions or what have you, that's why I argue it's so important for you to take ownership of your own healing. Because you can drive that placebo, right? If you're the one who's in charge of your healing, you have much greater confidence in what you're doing. But more importantly, what would Jung say if he mentioned how sad it was that it took 20 years for information that doctors knew to get to the broader public, for them to understand? What would he say now, as exampled when I mentioned to my doctor, I don't know how many years ago it was, but I mentioned my microbiome. And when I first mentioned my microbiome, he chuckled. That's pseudoscience. Right? I brought in, when I finally got diagnosed with my HS, which is even another tragedy, because for years he treated me, and it wasn't until I had what's called a sinus tract. So it was a 6 or 8 inch long subcutaneous tract that had been bleeding for well over a year in a very sensitive spot. And I really couldn't afford Band-Aids anymore, because you can only imagine how many you'd go through, not to mention the sticky, it just destroys your skin. So I used bandanas. And it wasn't until I said, "Hey, this is," and I showed it to him, that he gave me a referral. But what I didn't realize at the time, it wasn't because I showed him how bad it was and really kind of said, "Hey, what the," It was because, follow me on how tragic this was. I had a softball-sized abscess between my legs one time, and I couldn't live with it. I couldn't bear it. So I went to the emergency room, hoping they could drain it. I don't take any painkillers, so I wasn't there for any pain pills. And because it was on the side where I have trouble in my hips, when I have inflammation, I have hip troubles. It makes it difficult for the hip to move, right? The doctor actually noticed me getting up on the table when they were inspecting the abscess, this big, it's a pocket of sebum and blood that builds up from the inflammation. As they were inspecting that, the doctor noticed how bad my hip was. So not only did this doctor, because he, once, as I said, I don't take any painkillers, but he could see how big it was. I'm pretty sure no other patient would have got to that point without any pain pills, refused pain pills, and still be in that point. But what shocked him most, and he told me this, is that I was in more pain and discomfort from my hip. But of course, not understanding how this stuff works, at the time, I didn't understand that it was related. I thought I had pulled something in my hip. But not only did he give me a consult to a dermatologist, but he also got me into x-rays and ultrasound because he thought it was so bad. Long story short, it was. It was just, I guess, essentially fibromyalgia. When I have a flare, inflammation, my joints, sometimes certain joints, sometimes a lot of them, if not. I won't say all, I can't know for sure, but you know what I mean. Sometimes it's one joint, like my hip, sometimes my hip and my toes, and sometimes it's my ankles and my knees and my hips, and it's all around. But this hip thing is really bad because you can't lift your leg. I can't even put on my socks because of I can't, it's almost like I can't lift the leg, right? So what I ended up realizing after the fact was the reason why my doctor got me a referral to a dermatologist, because by the way, in Canada, it can take 2 years. I called around myself, and they were telling me it'd be a year or two. Because when I went to the hospital, he told me it was a skin disease. The dermatologist said it's so fast that I didn't catch it, what the name of the disease was. But I did catch dermatologist, right, that's a skin disease. And the doctor that brought in the dermatologist explained to me what to do. He told me about taking a sitz bath, which is an Epsom salt bath. But that was about all he knew about the disease. In fact, the doctor that called in the dermatologist didn't even know how to pronounce hidradenitis suppurativa because he mispronounced it. So I didn't even know what it was. I went home and I looked and I'm looking and I couldn't find it. And I can't quite remember whether I found it before I went to the doctor or not, like the name of the disease. But neither here nor there. So my doctor let me go nearly 10 years with this disease, telling me that it's all in my head, right? Let me think it was ingrown hairs or what have you. Get to the point where I am so sick, arguably he kind of did it to me because when I explained to my doctor that I had to give up all medicine and I went on a natural diet and I was eating cannabis, hemp seed oil and hemp seed initially because I couldn't afford, the cannabis, and eventually I found some people that were kind enough to help me out because I was eating the live plant. I explained this to him, and obviously I was using the cannabis. I was smoking it at the time, but I realized, because of my disease, I realized I had to cut out the smoking. So I actually began vaporizing. And when you're broke and, housebound, what do? Well, I lucked out. I was able to put together a homemade volcano vaporizer. So I took a ball, the little thing you put in a bong. It's a bowl. Yeah, sorry, a bowl. So I took a bowl and a down stem from a rig, a water pipe, and I put that in a turkey bag, an oven bag, elastic the down stem to the bag to keep it sealed in. And then I found a really good old Milwaukee heat gun with adjustable temperature. Right? So you, thankfully, we have the interwebs. You look up and see at what temperature cannabis vaporizes. You're not destroying as many of the cannabinoids. Again, beggars can't be choosers, so when you only have so much medicine, you need to have it, as much of it as possible. Smoking it, you only get like 70% of the cannabinoids, if that. Vaporizing it, you get something more on the lines of 90%. But as I was saying, what's actually coincidental, I actually had to stop working because the disease got so bad, because I just couldn't. I mean, I ruined a couple chairs because I had abscess burst at work, and I'd have to go home to take care of these things, and then I'd have not just my coworkers, but the coworkers would encourage the customers to complain, even though they knew it was medical issues. But again, 10, 15 years ago, that was okay to discriminate against someone because of a disease. But what I was getting at is my disease exploded when my doctor told me, that's it, I don't know anything else I can do for you. So I stopped going to him for over a year or more. Because what would I go to him for? He said there was nothing for me. I wasn't taking any medicine, blah, blah, blah. He didn't support cannabis at the time. I forgot to mention that. But so finally, when I started to really start to see some differences, start to heal, I lost 100 and some pounds. I was starting to feel better. I had really started to figure something out. But I had to go back to the doctor now, because every few years I have to renew my AZ license, my Class A commercial driver's license, I guess, in most other jurisdictions, right? I can drive just about anything with wheels. Well, I can drive just about anything with wheels or floats, to be honest. Misspent youth in northern Ontario. You learn to drive a lot of boats and trucks and snowmobiles, dirt bikes, and motorbikes, and quads, and Argos, and I can drive just about everything that doesn't fly. I guess I'll say that, right? So I had to go back to keep my license, because it's not cheap to get, it's not cheap to maintain, and once you lose it, you have to go right back through all the hubbub to get it back. So I don't want that to happen, obviously, because, again, of my disease. Can you understand this? Right? During the lockdown, we were in the worst COVID lockdown, and our Ontario provincial government didn't even postpone our medicals. So this is the middle, well, I think it was, 2021, June. I had to go to the doctor. So, again, remembering, I can only go about an hour without having to go to the bathroom, and never mind being around things that might be contamination. I can't go out for too long because I can't really eat anywhere, because pretty much everything's contaminated for me. In fact, in the last couple months, I've realized that I have a severe allergy to food colorings. But that's neither here nor there. So it had been a year or more since I'd seen him, maybe even 2 years. You have to go in every 5 years for your driver's license. For renewal, you got to get a medical. And so, so I went in, expecting he was going to be his usual dismissive, gaslighting self, right? And so I really wasn't open with him at all. And I don't know what had changed, because when I came back in, he was a different man all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden, he understood, the microbiome, it was important. Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to explain why my HS got so bad. So actually, he didn't support my cannabis. So before I stopped going to see him, he made me go a year without using cannabis. And he still didn't support me after I did that. So I went back on cannabis. I had to get back to being healthy, because a year being off of the cannabis was rough. I had a really tough time. And as I said, I showed him how important it was, because not only did I do what he asked, to spend a year with no cannabis, and obviously that's no drugs whatsoever. I wasn't even taking any sort of painkillers or anything like that. But that made my HS just go bonkers. I'm sure it was a combination of him saying, there's nothing more we can do for you, but not realizing, like, dude, you were only ever trying to deal with my anxiety. You never even tried to heal my HS or, anything else, let alone, you should have understood. He knew my family history, so he should have known my history of trauma, never mind what he didn't know. But he did know of my brain injury when I was a kid, so he 100% should have known that inflammation is what I needed to fight, because that's what was fighting my own painkillers and killing my own mood. But again, this is why we're here. This is why I'm here talking about this, because again, write your story, because it may become part of somebody's survival guide. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that someone doesn't have to go 20, 25